Okay, this is a guide to the basic 1,000 word academic paper. There are three things really that we are looking for in an academic paper. You need to show that you are able to research the topic and that you're able to present the results of the research and that you can present those results in the form of a coherent argument. Let's take each one of those in turn. Researching a topic. Well, that means going to databases like JSTOR and the Literature Resource Centre, things like Project Muse and so on. Libraries? Well, yes, of course, sure. But there's a lot more information online these days than there is in a typical library. As you research these kinds of sources, you need to keep your eyes open for particular issues that are going to interest you, that you think might be that's what I'm going to want to write about, kind of thing. And you also need to look at things that are particularly being strongly debated in those academic papers, so that, for example, people would talk quite a lot about Hamlet and was he really mad? And you'll find papers which will argue that he was, yes, mad from the beginning, no, never mad, or not mad at the beginning but later on became mad, and so on and so forth. So what different arguments are there? You need to show that you know what the different arguments are and who makes those arguments. What do you think is the right argument? Keep on researching and see if you can find out what you think is the right answer to the question of whether Hamlet is or was or ever was mad. Okay? That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I talk about ability to research a topic. Let's move on to the second item. In addition to researching a topic, you need to show that you can present the results of that research. Well, that means starting off with an open mind and genuinely presenting the results of the research, not forcing your information presentation into a kind of pattern that fits what you've already decided from the beginning. So suppose you started off by feeling that Hamlet really was mad, and that he wasn't just pretending, but that as you carried on your research, you found that there are pretty good arguments to say that actually he was never mad and that he was sane all the way through. Just for example, okay? So if such a thing happens, you don't have to stick with the idea that you started off with. You can modify your approach. You can change in order to show what it is that you now really think compared with what it was that you thought when you started writing. Think of this as like a scientist who's conducting an experiment. The scientist wouldn't say what the result of the experiment is going to be before doing the experiment. The scientist would do the experiment first and then report on the results. And that's what we'd hope would happen, isn't it? And in the same way, as students of literature, we want to be reporting on what the research shows you. We don't want to decide what the results of the research are going to be before we start and just pick facts that are going to fit with our idea. We want to give the best explanation covering all the information that we've been able to find out through our research relating to our topic. So that's what I mean by presenting the results of the research in a general sense, and then more specifically, the third point, that you're presenting the results of the research as a coherent argument. All right, now, an academic paper is basically an argument. It's not discussing something, it's not talking about something, it's proving something, it's demonstrating something. All right, and to be able to write a good academic paper, you also have to be able to think logically. You know you have to know how to put those facts and different pieces of information together. You need to be able to construct a coherent argument. And so that's the third thing that an academic paper is testing. And yes, it is. It's a complicated thing. There are different ways of doing it, and I'm just showing one way. There are other ways, but I would strongly recommend you to use this at least at the beginning. Until you can really master this approach, I would say it's probably better not to try doing it in other ways, but to focus on being able to present your material in a clear, straightforward kind of fashion. And there are differences between this structure that I'm going to show you and traditional ways of presenting information. Japanese has traditionally not presented information in this way, and Western discourse also has only fairly recently, in the last 20 or 30 years, developed this as the kind of benchmark for academic writing, the sign that this is a well-structured paper. I think it's a good idea to try to master this kind of paper. It can be adapted also to other types of paper, historical papers, scientific papers, or whatever. So I think it's probably useful in a more general sense. Okay, so here we have the basic plan or outline or structure of an academic paper, and I've put it in Japanese to start off with. What I'm going to do is each phrase is going to get changed into English, like this one, as I explain that this is about how to write a literature paper. The next one, top right-hand side, okay, showing the information that I would like to see at the top of the page. I don't mind personally whether it's at the left or the right. Some teachers might care about that. I don't really care, but I would like to see that information there. It's all useful. And then the paper itself, starting with the title. Okay, now the title would normally divide itself into 3 pieces of information, and those 3 pieces of information in a basic paper will usually be the topic, the text, and the author. So it would be something like Madness in Hamlet by William Shakespeare. Now, everybody knows in this case that Hamlet was written by William Shakespeare, so you don't necessarily need to put the author in for a very famous text. The topic could be more complicated. In this case, it's a very simple one, just madness, but it could be much more complicated than that. But you need to identify your topic, and you need to show what the text it relates to. Don't write something like my impression of Hamlet or something like that, because that's not objective. That's not, in Japanese, kakkanteki. It's not going to tell somebody who doesn't know you or doesn't know our class what you've been writing about. So you have to imagine that you're writing something which is like those papers that you've been researching. Those papers that are on the databases, you have to write in that same objective kind of way. All right, so let's move on then to the introduction, which is the first paragraph of the paper, and that first paragraph should begin with background information. Now, very often I get things like, oh, background information, what shall I do? Oh yes, I'll say something about William Shakespeare, I'll say something about how famous he was, I'll say something about where he was born, and that sort of thing. Well, no, that's not background information for this paper because it's not connected with the topic of the paper. All right, that kind of background information we can get from Wikipedia, we can get from SparkNotes. We don't need your academic paper to tell us that Shakespeare was very famous or that he was born in Stratford-on-Avon or something like that. Okay, then, if that's not the right sort of information, how about giving information about Hamlet, that it's set in Denmark, that it tells the story of a young man whose father has been murdered by his uncle, and that the uncle has taken control. No. We don't want to know what the uncle's taken control of. We don't want to know about Denmark. We don't want to know anything about any of that, really, because, again, that's just a sort of summary of the text. And we can find that on SparkNotes or anywhere else. We don't need that kind of information. So what kind of information am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for information about what you said your topic is going to be. I'm looking for information about, in this case, it would be madness in Hamlet. All right, so unless it's about madness and it has some connection to madness in in Hamlet, in Shakespeare's play, and in the person of Hamlet as a character, then I'm not really interested in the information that you're going to give me. So it has to be focused on the topic of your paper. All right, so please be very careful. You only have 1,000 words. Every single word has to be connected to your topic. All right, so nothing about how famous Shakespeare is and how many languages his works have been translated into. Nothing about the background information of the text of Hamlet. Not unless it's connected to your topic. All right, so your 1,000 words have to be focused exactly on the topic. In this case, let's say it's madness in Hamlet. All right, so it has to be about madness. It would, in other words, it would be things like explaining what different theories people have had about Hamlet's madness, what reasons they might have had for those theories, very briefly. Okay, just giving kind of people have said that Hamlet's antic disposition, which is his famous words where he says that he's going to pretend to be mad, that it is a pretense all the way through. Other people would argue, well, it starts off as a pretense, but he ends up really mad. Show who makes these arguments and explain the background in that kind of way. It won't always be like that, but very often it will be the background to the critical reactions to the text, the background to the debate that's going on among critics about the text. So that would be your first 3 or 4 sentences. It might be a bit more, a bit less, but those your first few sentences would be giving necessary background related to the topic of your paper. And moving on from that, you would then have the thesis statement, which should be one sentence. And that one sentence should clearly express your main basic argument. In other words, it should not be the purpose of this paper is to think about whether Hamlet is mad or not. It should give a clear answer. The purpose of this paper is to show that Hamlet was never mad, for example, or that he was always mad, or whatever it might be. Okay, you may or may, you don't really need the words "the purpose of this paper." All right, that's kind of atarimae. It's obvious. It should be obvious that that's what you're writing as the purpose of your paper. So you don't really need those words, but sometimes they may help it to be clear that that really is what you're talking about. Okay, some teachers might ask you not to give those words. I'm not going to be too fussed if you say it. At least it highlights the thesis statement for me and makes it clear that this is what you're going to be writing about. This is what you're going to be arguing. And following that argument, you want a summary of the main reasons. All right, so reason 1 expressed in one short sentence. Reason 2, again, expressed in a short sentence or in a phrase. And reason 3, again, expressed very briefly, but clearly, in a way that's understandable. All right, so not just giving a vague explanation, but something that's a clear reason that stands by itself and is understandable as a reason. And that first reason is going to be explained in detail in the main body, where we are going to write a paragraph which will explain in detail what that first reason was. All right, so we give a clear explanation and we give the details that will explain exactly what that supporting argument is for the thesis. All right, and continuing to the second reason for why we think Hamlet was or was not mad, that would go in the next paragraph of the main body, and we would give a detailed explanation there. All right, and we can move on then and give the third reason in the next paragraph, the last paragraph of the main body, and we'll give our third reason, giving a detailed explanation of it, so that those 3 arguments have been fully expressed in the main body, so that now all we need to do is conclude our paper This is actually perhaps the most difficult thing, and if you don't get it right, I will forgive students for not getting it right, because I quite often read professional academic papers which don't have a very good conclusion either. What people tend to do, what students especially tend to do, is just basically they repeat what they said in the introduction. They repeat the thesis and they repeat the reasons, more or less saying the same thing, saying, now I've showed that that's true, so that's all they do. They repeat what they've said in the introduction, more or less, in the second part of the introduction, the thesis, the reasons. If possible, in that last paragraph, what I would like to see would be a detailed explanation of the thesis. You see, we've given a detailed explanation of reason 1 supporting the thesis in the second paragraph of the paper. That's the first paragraph of the main body. We've given a detailed explanation for our second reason in the next paragraph of the main body, and our third reason is explained in detail in the last paragraph of the main body, but we haven't really given a detailed explanation of the thesis itself. All right, so we're now in a position, or we should be in a position, now that we've explained all the reasons in detail, we should be able to say in a little bit more detail about our information about our thesis, using material that we've said in the main body, referring back to things that we've said in the main body, but explaining the thesis itself in a little bit more detail. As I say, that's really quite difficult to do, and I will be fairly generous with students who've managed to get as far as the end of the main body with a good argument. I won't be too strict about that conclusion, because I think that takes a lot of practice, okay, to get that right. So basically that's it then for the structure of the paper. All right, so you will be able to go to my website and find academic papers written by students which will show this kind of structure. So the next step, the final step really that we need to look at in this presentation, is the way of giving footnotes and references. All right, there are two main styles for doing this, the Chicago style and the MLA style, and the Chicago style basically uses footnotes, all right? So that you might look in a Chicago style paper and you'll see this kind of layout of text with a footnote at the bottom of the page. And the number 1 here obviously corresponds to the number 1 here. And what the reference is giving is the authors. In this case, there are 3 authors of a particular paper, the title of the paper, the or in this case, the title of the book, the Anti-Nicene Fathers, the publisher, the date, the date, the place of publication, the publisher, the date, and the page. At the end there, 492 refers to the page. So that would be the Chicago style based on footnotes. And a lot of academic papers follow that basic kind of layout. All right, so the important thing here is that this footnote in this case is connected to a quotation, but you would give footnotes of this kind for any information that you had taken from that particular source. So it doesn't have to be just a quotation, it could also be information that you've used. All right, and so the Chicago style basically uses footnotes, and the MLA style uses in-text references with a list of works cited at the end. Sometimes the Chicago style or similar also requires a list of works cited at the end. I'm going to focus more on the MLA style because that's the style preferred by the department at Sophia University, which is where I'm working. So let's just take a look at that and see how that works. You'd have your text, for example, something like this. And inside the text, you'll notice that there are, okay, Wallace 122, all right, and we've got rig mentioned there, and 5. Okay, we don't need to say rig 5 because it's clear that it's rig from the sentence. So the MLA handbook, which students at Sophia will all, in the English Literature Department will all have, this will explain this system to you in a little bit more detail. But the basic idea then is to give the surname, the family name of the author, followed by the page number. All right, they can both be inside brackets, or they can be separate from brackets, and the author's name can appear inside the sentence. All right, and again, we use those not just for quotations. The first one there, cultural capacities among the laity, is a quotation, but the second one, thrived in England right up until the end of the medieval period. It's not a quotation, it's just information that came from that source, from Rig. All right. Now, if we're using this system, of course, we don't know what all this means. We don't know what Rig means, so we need to have a list of the footnotes and references. Sorry, not footnotes and references. In this case, we need to have a list of the works cited, and the works cited would appear in this kind of form, so that it's Rig would be the beginning of the reference. Again, the family name, the surname, is the beginning of the reference, and then it moves on to the initials or the first name, Rig AG, Ridley Nicholas, and then the title of the book or the academic paper that we're talking about. If it's a book, it would be in italics. If it was an academic paper, there isn't an example here, but if it was an academic paper, it would be in quotation marks. And the layout is slightly different. Again, I would ask you to take a close look at the MLA handbook for this. And it would be in alphabetic order, so that you can clearly see Rig, followed by Ridley, followed by Tartoff, followed by Wallace, so that you can find these A, B, C, D laid out in alphabetical order, R, S, T, U, V, W, okay, alphabetical order, so that they're easy to find. And this would be the list of works cited at the end of the paper. All right, so yeah, Rig, all right, Wallace, those are the two references that we had there. Those would be the references that we'd be looking for. And that's it. That's the basic structure. You may not be able to follow all the details. Nobody gets 100%, or it's very unusual for somebody to get 100% on their paper. So if you can't follow all of the details of the layout and structure that I've given you here, don't worry unduly, but do try to follow as much as possible to follow the kind of basic structure that I've set out here. And don't forget to check the model essays that I've put on the website. Those are examples of essays written by students. I've shown mostly good ones, but sometimes I've shown some of the mistakes that students have made as well, or some of the little weaknesses. And don't forget to check other pages on the website that give you guidance for writing a paper. All right, that's it.